I'd heard rumblings, sometime around Christmas, snatches of news here and there, yet I was still totally unprepared for how drastically my life would be affected by the events that were about to unfold. Like many in the UK with jobs in the retail and service industry, the onset of the pandemic had confined us to our homes. While our friends and lovers transitioned to either performing their duties remotely or encased within layers upon layers of PPE, the rest of us just gazed into the abyssal vacuum where our hectic work lives had once resided.
That was until Nintendo came to fill that void with copious amounts of digital debt and terrible UI design. Seriously, it's a horror.
To date, I've put in over 545 hours into New Horizons. That's 22.7 days, 3.2 weeks. I spent approximately 16.09% of 2020 hunched over my Switch, simping for Tom Nook. It'd be no exaggeration to say that I had become a man obsessed. My time and consciousness had been fully consumed by the comings and goings of my idyllic private island. Seeking shelter from the horrors of reality, I had totally immersed myself within the world of Animal Crossing.
But what is immersion in video games? Is it watching your horse's love lumps wither away in the tundra? Is it the palpable sense of anxiety and claustrophobia as you desperately fight for breath? Or is it being thoroughly terrified by Psycho Mantis's ability to read your memory card and move your controller with his mind? To be immersed fully in a video game is to be so truly invested within the experience that it matters not that you're rapidly hurtling towards middle age, that you have no discernible skills or talents, that the only thing weaker than your will to live is your rapidly receding hairline.
In video games, you can be whatever your heart desires. A vicious, revenge-driven shark, a tiny celestial prince, or the ultimate arbiter of violence and chaos, a very mean goose. The choice is yours. You might consider a significant factor in fostering immersion to be the cohesive implementation of the numerous gameplay systems and design elements that form the finished game. The way the sun hits the water and breaks through the trees, the sound of your horse's footsteps subtly altering as you cross a wooden bridge, or the HUD only displaying at contextually appropriate moments. From the sound design to the art direction to the numerous menus and UIs, all coexisting and supporting each other in a way that builds a seamless user experience. Realising this tangible sense of space, governed by the physical and metaphysical rules similar to the world in which we live, and then giving players the necessary tools to experience it in an uninterrupted manner is an integral component to immersing us in the worlds we adore. There is a degree of subjectivity that we should acknowledge, particularly when considering the distinction between realism and immersion. A notable example of this would be the laborious pace at which Red Dead Redemption 2 forces you to engage with its systems, be it shopping, fishing, cleaning your revolver, or meticulously scrubbing your head,
shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes.
Red Dead 2 places massive emphasis upon the everyday domestic minutiae of its world, which it then proceeds to continually rub in your face again, and again. It elevates the inconsequential to an art form, and in doing so risks alienating the player. Minor gameplay functions that in other games would warrant a minimal amount of animation or player input become almost Odyssean in nature.
One very specific element of the horse riding is particularly infuriating.
Headshot. Ultra kill. Double kill. Killing spree. Holy shit.
Mate, I don't know where to begin.
Why does this keep happening to me?
Let's face it, the first time you accidentally rode your horse into a tree, you probably snorted at Arthur Morgan's Looney Tunes antics, face planting the bark and crumpling like a man off his face on one too many premium shandies. But every subsequent time Rockstar forces you to engage with this minuscule facet of its world, it only further sows and nurtures the seeds of frustration. In endeavouring to create this pinnacle of unfettered realism, it could be argued that in some way they lost sight of what actually makes playing video games enjoyable. It's unequivocally undeniable that Rockstar created a gorgeous, realistic world, peerless in ambition and scope. A game so memorable that even now I'm thinking about playing it again. My backlog be damned. Yet every time I get no-scope insta-KO'd by an errant elm tree mid-mission, which I then have to restart over something so seemingly arbitrary, I'm immediately pulled out of the gameplay flow, any or all illusion of immersion instantaneously evaporating. Another integral component of games that make a significant but oft underappreciated contribution to fostering immersion is the UI. The way in which the game's various systems relay relevant information to us can have a massive impact upon how we experience that world. Sometimes even being the line between us forsaking society Lawnmower Man style or putting the game down after 5 minutes to move on to something infinitely more engaging. Bad UI is a big turn-off. Like poor dental hygiene or secretly flicking your bogies onto the ceiling in the middle of the night.
Hang about. I never did that. I know it's a weirdly specific thing to bring up, but trust me, it's 100% fictitious. And if anyone tells you otherwise, they're a liar.
One of my earliest memories of playing a game that had a somewhat novel approach to displaying HUD information was 1992's Wolfenstein 3D, a game I would play on my, even by mid-90s standards, archaic beast of a desktop PC. I was beguiled and repulsed in equal measure by the way BJ Blazkowicz's gradually deteriorating meatbag of a face sat in the very centre of the game's HUD, becoming increasingly bloody and crumpled the closer he came to death, which was pretty frequently. Another game that I sunk endless hours of my childhood into is an unsung hidden gem of the MS-DOS era, Skyroads, a sort of proto-endless runner in which you pilot a ship, but at least I think it's a ship. It doesn't fly and it doesn't have wheels. It kind of just slides around, hopping between these platforms and tunnels in outer space, creating a gameplay loop that's as addictive as the concept is mystifying. It was the first game I played where the HUD was thematically integrated into the game's world. It wasn't a series of numbers or icons displayed on an invisible fourth wall that separated me from the action, but an actual ship's control panel. It made 7-year-old me feel like Luke Skywalker piloting an X-Wing. Video game UI has always towed the line between practicality and immersion, arbitrarily swinging between these 2 points over the past 40 plus years. When HUDs first crawled from the primordial ooze, wriggling their bellies up onto land for the very first time, they were primitive and ungainly, merely functional ways to display relevant data in a clear and concise manner. Yet as games evolved, so too did the UI experience. From your Pip-Boy wrist computer in Fallout being the source of your in-game menus, or the map and compass in Firewatch, which your character Henry physically holds up in front of his face for you to reference, designers and developers have continued to experiment with innovative and creative approaches to UI.
The Dead Space series is highly revered for its extraterrestrial brand of claustrophobic horror, its deeply satisfying dismemberment-centric combat, and its holistic approach to immersing the player through UI design.
Protagonist Isaac Clarke's health and stasis meter are displayed on the back of his rig suit, and his inventory is holographically projected from his wrist. These design decisions were all born of a desire to keep the player engaged in the fiction. UI lead on the series, Dino Ignacio, elaborates further. We decided that the inventory should not only live in-game, it also shouldn't pause the game when you are using it. The intention was to maintain the tension and thrill of gameplay at every aspect. This innovative approach to fostering an immersive experience is an example of diegetic UI. This means that the UI elements physically exist within the game's world. Franklin's phone in GTA 5 is a tangible object within that world's fiction that also functions as an important component of the game's menu system through which information is relayed to us. Non-diegetic UI is far more common. It exists in this sort of third dimension between the game world and our world. Dino Ignacio describes it as a piece of glass that separates us, the player, from the character that we're playing as. In The Last of Us, Naughty Dog employ non-diegetic UI almost exclusively. From crafting a shiv to plunging it deep into some poor soul's unsuspecting neck, each part of the process is accompanied by an unfussy flat menu or button prompt that exists solely upon this piece of glass. Joel and Ellie are in no way aware of these menus or prompts. They exist purely for the benefit of us, the player. But what happens when a development team takes the concept of an immersive diegetic UI and uses it as a means to allow players to organically navigate and explore their game world? Ghost of Tsushima is a grand, sweeping tale thematically seeped in notions of family, loyalty and honour set during the first Mongol invasion of Japan. You are the headstrong and stoic Jin Sakai, a samurai of the Shimura clan, who must rescue his uncle from the invading Mongol forces and reclaim his home. You explore the visually lush island of Tsushima, forging alliances with friends new and old, rallying an army with enough strength to defeat the Mongol forces and their leader, the mercilessly cruel Khotun Khan. Now systemically, Ghost of Tsushima's open world is a pretty typical example of what I'll be referring to as the Ubisoft archetype, which I define as being comprised of the following 5 key elements of game design. 1. The game world is populated with a high volume of side activities and collectibles. 2. These side activities are highly repetitive in nature with very limited variation. 3. Players are rewarded for engaging with this content with new equipment, abilities, or stat boosts. 4. This side content is typically optional and will have little or no effect upon the game's main narrative. 5. The locations of these activities and collectibles are typically given to the player en masse via a narrative framing device which reveals the specific contents of the world map, such as the now ubiquitous Ubisoft towers. Ghost of Tsushima fits this archetype to a T. It is undeniably a game whose foundational open world mechanics are built upon the blueprint set out and refined by Ubisoft. Where Ghost deviates from this form though, and in doing so sets itself apart from others in the genre, is the way in which it subverts element 5 of my archetype, the Ubisoft Tower method of discovery. In the majority of open world games, side content and collectibles are typically revealed to the player through either surveying the landscape from higher ground or liberating specified areas from enemy occupation. These mechanics have their roots in Ubisoft's 2 big heavyweight franchises, Assassin's Creed and Far Cry, and have popped up everywhere from Horizon Zero Dawn to Spider-Man, and even appear in a limited way in Ghost of Tsushima too. Unfortunately, this mechanic frequently results in a map that looks as if the UI team were led by Jackson Pollock, overloading and overwhelming the player with an excess of information and activities to the point of absurdity. This came to a head with 2014's Assassin's Creed Unity, which offers up a map so riddled with icons that one wonders if a cipher is needed to decode and understand it. Although, I must admit a certain guilty fondness for mindlessly zoning out while working my way through a long-ass list of side activities. There's something innately satisfying about the easy sense of accomplishment that comes with grinding through side content. But much like glimpsing yourself naked in the mirror or eating a Kit Kat, fuck Nestle, afterwards, all you're left with is a deep sense of shame and self-loathing. In spite of Ubisoft's best efforts to move away from this mechanic, the remnants of it can still be felt across all of its franchises. Even in last year's Valhalla, where upon scaling a sync point to survey the land, the navigation section of your HUD lights up like Blackpool illuminations, dazzling the player like a soon-to-be roadkill pancake in the headlights of questionable UI design. Another problematic byproduct of this system is how it can encourage an over-reliance upon the navigational aspects of the game's HUD. Instead of breathing in these vast, beautiful handcrafted worlds, I'm actually spending 99% of my exploration time staring at waypoint indicators to make sure I've not been led too far astray.
Ghost of Tsushima sidesteps all of these issues by placing a heavy emphasis upon organic exploration, a process developers Sucker Punch fostered through a considerable use of diegetic visual cues to guide us as we navigate the world. They swiftly introduce a simple yet devastatingly effective visual language, all while ensuring it is contextually and thematically intertwined within the world that they've built.
This is a design philosophy best summed up by Sucker Punch's environment art lead, Joanna Wang. Exploring the world of Tsushima is a core part of our gameplay, and we treat the environment like a living character, one that's breathing, moving, has our own personality, and is charming and plentiful. Throughout Ghost, the main method of navigation is the guiding wind. By swiping up on the touchpad, a blustering gale will pick up, pointing you in the direction of your next quest or selected location. By replacing the more traditional waypoint HUD system that we see in nearly every other open world game with this entirely unique concept, ensures an immersive exploratory experience for the player. The guiding wind wouldn't be nearly as impactful were it not for the great consideration Sucker Punch gave to the way that it interacts with almost every environmental aspect of their world. Lead visual effects artist Matt Vainio reveals the lengths to which his team went. Aside from the particles, there are trees, grass, cloth, and ropes that all move with the wind. We integrated this global wind direction into nearly every single effect in the game. When a bomb goes off or a campfire is lit, the smoke drifts in the correct wind direction. This is true for fires, sparks, smoke, pretty much everything. It's this insane dedication and attention to detail that really drives home this illusion of Tsushima as a living, breathing ecosystem.
Sucker Punch also devised another equally creative and no less charming way to lead the player to undiscovered side content and collectibles: songbirds.
When out exploring, the player will be accosted by amiable yellow songbirds, who if they choose to follow, will lead them to a hitherto unknown point of interest or activity. This unusual method of discovery aids the player's exploration in a seemingly organic and natural manner, never feeling overly intrusive or overbearing. This shift away from more traditional methods of player guidance was a conscious, artistic and mechanical decision. As Matt Vanio puts it, we wanted the player to be exploring, engaging their mind in the navigation process, and not following some sort of game UI without thinking. Furthermore, both the guiding wind and songbirds have emotional and narrative significance. In a flashback, we see Yuriko, the elderly caretaker of the Sakai family estate, comforting a grieving Jin with the words, "Your father is the wind at your back, your mother the birds in the trees." This subtle detail really encapsulates Sucker Punch's desire to utilise every facet, function and mechanic of their game to build a thematically cohesive world. The loss of his parents, and that particularly of his father, weighs heavily upon Jin throughout Ghost of Tsushima's tale, which gives the decision to have them be ever present throughout the game, personified as elements of nature, an emotional weight and resonance that won't be lost on anyone familiar with the sordid trappings of grief. Sucker Punch also extend this philosophy of diegetic immersion to the visual design of the side content that populates Tsushima. Each activity and collectible has distinct visual indicators that can be easily identified and distinguished from one another at distance. Fox dens can be found beneath yellow trees, surrounded by gently pulsating fireflies. Shinto Shrines can usually be spotted from their elevated positions upon mountain tops, and the pathways that lead up to them are marked by a series of torii gates. Flocks of birds circle above the peaceful spots of reflection where you compose haikus. The restorative and soothing hot springs are marked by the steam rising up off them and the distinctive wind-stooped maple trees growing upon their banks. Even side quests and enemy camps can be found by following the plumes of smoke that rise from the horizon. Creating a strong sense of visual character within Ghost of Tsushima's landscape and ecology was integral to realising the team's unique vision of melding form and functionality, a point expounded upon by Matt Vanio. The vistas are important to both the gameplay by helping you find objectives, as well as being an important part of setting the tone and art direction. We felt that finding quests should be as natural as possible.
There is an inherent beauty within Sucker Punch's decision to lean so heavily upon diegetic visual cues as a way of fostering immersion.
No longer is the player suffocated beneath a tangled dog pile of UI, teabagged by the musty gooch of some meaningless HUD element.
Who's gonna be next?
Instead, they are naturally drawn to appreciate the timeless beauty of a world that has been meticulously crafted to not only aesthetically please, but to act as a fully functioning system of navigation and exploration. An innovative alternative to the bloated rot that has run rampant through open world games ever since the child of a Ubisoft CEO declared the lack of the first Assassin's Creed side content boring, forcing the team into 5 days of intense crunch to fatten up their finished game with collectible detritus like a disgusting post-war cyber sausage.
What I'm trying to say is that if I was given a time machine and a chance to stop one child from being born, it won't be baby Hitler.
In the same way that Breath of the Wild's mechanical influences are starting to rear their heads in games such as Genshin Impact or even in Ubisoft's own Immortals Phoenix Rising, it won't be remiss to hope that the work Sucker Punch put in to creating Ghost of Tsushima has set a new precedent for open world exploration, raising the bar for the levels of innovation we should expect from developers, especially when they're continually wheeling out the same tired and tedious mechanical tropes year after year.
One can only dream of a future where we'll be hailing in a new generation of games, inspired by Sucker Punch's obvious but unobtrusive approach to exploration and world building. A future in which we'll chart new territory, aided not by a clutter of UI ephemera, but sweeping vistas and gorgeous environmental visual cues. A future where we'll be driven not by a desire to mindlessly work our way through a dirge of side content, but propelled forward by a keen hunger for organic exploration and environmental storytelling. Yeah, that's fine.
I'm the test. Real the test.
What do you think of that? You want your dinner? Interview with a cat.